Hundreds of jets sitting in the desert. This is what's left of the once mighty Boeing 737 MAX fleet. After 2 deadly crashes, the world grounded this jet and now they're rusting away in the desert. But why? Why did these planes crash? And how are they going to fix it? To answer that, we need to go back to 2018. In October of that year, a Lion Air flight crashed into the Java Sea shortly after takeoff. All 189 people on board lost their lives. Now, not long after that, an Ethiopian Airlines flight also crashed. Again, all 157 people on board were killed. It seemed like these crashes were unrelated until investigators started digging deeper. They found out that both planes had one thing in common: the newly designed Boeing 737 MAX. So how could a modern, efficient plane be so deadly? Well, the answer is quite simple: software. You see, planes have computers that help them They control things like the engines and the flaps. These computers are programmed with software, basically a set of instructions that tell the computer what to do. And this software can make the plane more efficient by automatically adjusting the engines and flaps. That way, the pilots don't have to worry about it. But in some cases, this software can be wrong. Like in the case of the Boeing 737 MAX. When the plane was being developed, Boeing wanted to improve its efficiency. So they added new engines and bigger wings. These changes meant that the plane would fly differently, so they needed to update the software. But there was a problem. The new software was basically When they tested it on a simulator, pilots struggled to keep the plane in the air. The plane kept nosediving. So Boeing worked on the software to make it less sensitive. They didn't want to change the design because that would cost time and money. They just wanted to tweak the software. And that's when they made a terrible mistake. You see, while they were tweaking the software, they created a system that was too complex for pilots to understand. It all starts with something called MCAS. That stands for Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. Basically, this system would control the plane's pitch, how it moves up and down. If the plane started to climb too quickly or descend too quickly, MCAS would kick in and adjust the flaps to level off the plane. That sounded good on paper, but in reality, it was a disaster waiting to happen. The problem was that MCAS only used one sensor to figure out if the plane was climbing or descending. If that sensor said the plane was climbing too fast, then it would adjust the flaps to bring the nose down. But what if that sensor was wrong? Well, there were multiple ways that could happen. For example, there was a possibility of faulty wiring, dirty sensors, or a glitch in the software. But no matter what the reason was, the sensor would send the wrong signal to MCAS. And when that happened, the system would push the nose of the plane down. And because the pilots didn't know what was happening, they fought with the plane until it was too late. And that's exactly what happened on Lion Air Flight 610. The pilots struggled to control the plane. They turned off the autopilot and tried to manually level off the plane. But Mix kept pushing the nose down. It kept fighting the pilots. And eventually, the plane nosedived into the sea. It was a horrible tragedy. But even after that, Boeing and the FAA decided to certify the Boeing 737 MAX. It wasn't safe, but at least they could fix the software, right? Well, yes. They did fix the software, but not before another plane crashed. On March 10th, 2019, an Ethiopian Airlines flight crashed. Once again, MCAS was to blame. The jet was climbing, and the pilots noticed that the plane was deviating from its flight path. They tried to correct it, but they couldn't. The plane went into a steep dive and crashed into a field. All 149 passengers and 8 crew members were killed. That's when the whole world grounded the Boeing 737 MAX. No one wanted to risk their lives on that plane. And that's when the lawsuits started coming in. American families who lost loved ones on the Ethiopian Airlines flight sued Boeing for wrongful death. And the families of the Lion Air crash sued as well. Boeing ended up paying out hundreds of millions of dollars to settle these lawsuits. Now, you might be wondering why we're talking about this now. The reason is that the 737 MAX is finally taking off again. In November of 2020, the FAA certified the Boeing 737 MAX. They fixed the software and they even added a second sensor to cross-reference the first one, but the damage was already done. No airline wanted to buy the 737 MAX, and that meant that Boeing had to park hundreds of planes in the desert. Now, at its peak, Boeing built 52,737 MAXs every month. But after the grounding, production slowed down. By 2020, they were only building 6 planes a month. Most of these planes were destined for China and other international airlines. But now they're stuck in Washington state. One of the biggest customers of the 737 MAX was American Airlines. They ordered 200 of them. They were supposed to use these planes to fly shorter routes, like from New York to Miami. But now they've canceled their order. Boeing has spent billions of dollars storing these planes and maintaining them. It costs around $12 million per plane every year. Now, it's not just American Airlines. Every single customer of the Boeing 737 MAX has canceled their orders. Southwest Airlines, for example, ordered 32 MAX 7 South. They were going to use them to fly from cities like Baltimore to Denver. But now, they've canceled their order. And it's the same story everywhere. The 737 MAX is a plane without a purpose. Now, Boeing has tried to sell these planes to other airlines, but most of them have rejected the offer. The only airline that bought the 737 MAX recently was Ryanair. They purchased 175 of them, but that's not going to make much of a dent in the inventory. Boeing still has hundreds of these planes in storage. In 2020, they restarted production, but it's not the same as before. Back then, they were building 52 planes a month. Now they're only building 26 a month. And that means that these planes are never going to sell. Boeing has 750,737 MAXs in various stages of completion. Some of them are fully assembled, while others only have a few parts. But no matter how complete they are, no one wants them. And that's why you're seeing more and more pictures of these planes in the desert. Where are they? Well, there's one place in particular that people are looking at. It's a desert in Southern California near Palmdale. Here you'll find dozens of 737 MAXs parked in a row. There are 65 of them here. They look like toys scattered across the desert. But these planes aren't toys. They're ticking time bombs. Every plane needs to be flown regularly. If they sit in the desert for too long, then they'll deteriorate. Their batteries will drain and their systems will rust. That's why Boeing tries to move these planes every once in a while. They fly them over to Moses Lake in Washington state. They're stored in hangars, at least they're in hangars. But even that's not a long-term solution. The planes need to be flown regularly. And that's why Boeing flies them over to Europe. Specifically, they fly them to a town called There are 115 planes here, all parked in a row. They're surrounded by hills and mountains, and it's almost like a plane graveyard. But there's nothing natural about this graveyard. These planes were killed by software. As we mentioned before, the 737 MAX is a perfectly good plane. It's just got a bad reputation. Maybe someday the world will forget about the crashes and they'll start buying the 737 MAX again. But until then, these planes are going to keep piling up in the desert. If you enjoyed this video, then check out this one. Thanks for watching.